Greetings, friends. Christ is risen. He truly is risen. I am back now with my good friend Matthew Namee, and we're going to have a conversation about something else this time. Today, we're talking about the Orthodox clergy crisis. Matthew Namee is the executive director of the Orthodox Studies Institute at St. Constantine College, which you can find out more about at orthodoxstudies.org. And he is also, this is probably what he's much better known for, the editor-in-chief of orthodoxhistory.org. And one of the offerings available on the Orthodox Studies website is a study of the current and growing shortage of Orthodox clergy in the United States. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So welcome back, Matthew, to my YouTube channel. It's good to have you.
Thanks, Father.
So so let's tell us a little bit about the study. When was it conducted?
So last year, mostly over the summer last year, we gathered data from various jurisdictions, dioceses, covering hundreds of Orthodox parishes in the United States across several of most of the major jurisdictions, to try to understand. What we were trying to determine was how many parishes are expected to need a new priest and not have zero priests and will need a new one over the coming 5-year period. That was the intent of the study.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about it? And I should, by the way, note for everybody that, especially if you're watching this on YouTube, there's going to be a link to the study in the notes on the YouTube video, so you can go read it for yourself. But so what are we seeing? Like, give me the basic shock numbers to start out with, because if someone reads the study, it is kind of shocking, actually.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people
disturbing.
Don't know. Like, I would say bishops are aware that this is a problem, right? As they're trying to staff parishes. A lot of clergy are probably aware that this is a problem. Parishes that are looking at pastoral transitions might be becoming aware that this is a problem, but I think probably most lay people do not even know that this is a problem. So, like, lay it out for me. What's the stuff that is going to get us excited?
So the big number is, well, one of the big numbers is that 25% of Orthodox parishes in the United States will need a new priest over the next 5 years.
Okay.
25% of them. So there's different ways we could look at this, but basically we ask people in decision-making roles, bishops, chancellors, that kind of thing. How many of your parishes that you're responsible for are going to need a new priest in the next 5 years? And there's nobody else at the parish. There's no other priests at the parish. And it's 25%, right? You can add to that, and I don't think people think about this, there's actually depositions, right? Priests being defrocked or laicized happens at a pretty steady rate for
various reasons. For various reasons. Some it's, that they leave the priesthood because they're done. They just don't want to do it anymore. Or they were widowed and they want to remarry, or they did something that was unbecoming of a priest. There's all kinds of possibilities for laicizations, depositions.
Exactly. And they tend to happen at as best I could tell with the data, a pretty steady rate. So once you combine those numbers, we're over 25%.
Okay.
Which is one thing, right? Aging clergy population, that kind of thing.
Sure.
Okay, fine.
Jobs need to be filled. This is understandable.
The scary thing is we're running a very large deficit. We're not producing enough new clergy, anywhere close to enough new clergy to offset the number that are leaving. Either they're retiring, or they're going to pass away because of old age, or they're going to be deposed. We're running a big deficit, which the result of that's parishes that don't have a priest to serve the services, or short-staffed parishes where the priest can't effectively minister to the whole community because there aren't enough priests in the community that's larger.
Yeah. So what kind of deficit are we looking at? Like, so if about 25% of parishes are going to need, or more, are going to need a new priest within the next 5 years, like, how many priests is that roughly? And then how many are we ordaining? Or
our deficit? So the deficit is 115 parishes per year. So there's about 2,000 canonical Orthodox parishes in the United States. About 115 parishes per year are going to need are going to need a new priest and will not be able to have one. That's the
Wow.
deficit.
Wow. So that means that, like, if things continue as they are, that within 20 years, um, Orthodoxy in America will have no clergy, basically, or so few that it will be crippled, utterly crippled.
What the effect of this is going to be? Yeah, you're going to have understaffed parishes. You're going to have it's going to have a chilling effect on the creation of new missions, because if you don't have enough priests, you can't add more parishes, right? There are parts of the country where Orthodoxy is absolutely booming. We have another study about to come out on converts and what are the numbers around
Yeah.
converts to
And
Orthodoxy.
and we'll be talking about that in a future video, everybody, by the way.
So we're having a convert surge at a time when we're running a deficit. We're going to have a priest shortage, right? So we can't start the missions, do the kind of relationships that need to be built for new people coming into the church with their clergy. That's all going to be much more difficult if we don't have enough clergy.
Yeah. So, like, how many new priests would we need within the next 5 years just to staff the openings that are going to come? To say nothing about new openings, like with new parishes or whatever.
So we need 575 new priests over the next 5 years. And seminary MDiv graduates, I misspoke earlier about the deficit. It's slightly lower, but seminary MDiv graduates, which is the primary source of our priests at this stage in the United States, at least, seminary MDiv graduates, we're talking, I'll give you some numbers. St. Vlad's at this point is producing about 8 male Eastern Orthodox sort of ordainable MDiv graduates per year. St. Tikhon's is producing about 9 per year on average. Holy Cross is in the same range. So those are the 3 main Orthodox seminaries. And we're talking about collectively, and then you add in some of the other smaller ones, maybe 30 a year, right? But we need 115 per year.
Wow.
So, right, we're running this big deficit. Now,
So
immigration helps a little bit, right? You have
bit.
immigrant clergy coming in, but it's not going to make up that shortfall.
So basically, we're producing a little more than 1/4 of the priests that we need in order just to keep things where they are now.
Correct. Now, that does not account for understaffed parishes that aren't necessarily going to have a vacancy, but they're understaffed. And it doesn't account for new missions. So when you add those in, which I think we should, but I don't have those numbers, it actually is the numbers are actually worse.
Yeah. So when, what does a clergy shortage look like in on the ground, right? Number one, it'll be a parish where the priest dies or retires or is deposed. He's gone for some reason. And they can't get a replacement, right? They might have some retired guy that comes in once in a while, or maybe there's nobody. Maybe they're doing reader services, or maybe they close the parish, right? That's one effect. Another one is what you just mentioned, is like that some parishes are underserved. We can see this happening now, where you got a parish that, for instance, might have hundreds of families or maybe 1,000 families or something, right? So if you imagine, like, there's about 3 people per family, roughly, is kind of way that works out, because a single person is regarded as a family unit generally, but also like a family with, parents and children it's about 3 people per family unit. So like if you have 1,000 families in a parish, that's 3,000 people roughly. And let's say you've got three priests at that parish, it's pretty well staffed, right? Each one of those people is responsible for 1,000 souls, each one of those priests. Or even let's say it's 500 family parish. Again, this is a big parish by Orthodox standards. That's 1,500 people. Each one of those 3 priests is responsible for 500 souls. But the reality is there are parishes out there that have that many families and 1 priest, right? So he's responsible for thousands of people. And there's, what is it called? The Dunbar number?
Yes.
What is that? What is this? Is because it's very relevant to this question.
Yeah, so the Dunbar number basically it's a sociological phenomenon
Okay.
that's been observed in populations, different populations of humans. That is essentially the number of relationships that a person can maintain, as I understand it. So it's about
Okay.
150 is around
100,
roughly the number.
150 relationships. So,
Right. So there is data. There is data. There's some evidence that. So if you look at attendance rates at Orthodox parishes, Alexei Krindach did some work on this several years ago. If you look at attendance rates at Orthodox parishes, there's a kind of there's a linear decline in attendance until you hit the rate, right, like the percentage of people that show up on a regular basis, until you hit the Dunbar number. And once you get to the Dunbar number, the parish is big enough that it gets to the Dunbar number, there is a non-linear decline in the rate of attendance. So that suggests that people are more disconnected from the community as the community surpasses that Dunbar number. And one of the ways to mitigate against that problem is to have more clergy, more priests, so that even if you have a bigger parish, you've got more shepherds taking care of the flock, right?
yeah, which makes a
And
lot of sense, right? Because like if if the parish is so big that the priest or priests can't really get to know everybody, then that means that the men that are kind of at the center of the community, the leaders of the community, that there's a group of people, maybe even the majority, depending on how big the parish is, that really don't have much of a relationship with him. And so don't have that sense of direct spiritual guidance, right? The priest is a guy that's kind of up in front on Sunday. Maybe they go to confession once in a while, but it's also observable. I don't know if this has been studied, that larger parishes have a much lower confession rate. People are going to confession less often, and fewer people are going.
we
But
should
as you,
study
and
that.
as you said, like church attendance is kind of the key. It's not everything, but it's a really important indicator of how committed people are. Is how often do they come? And that the larger the parish it is, the more people you have who don't come as often. Um, so what you're getting then from a spiritual point of view is uh, a lot of parishioners that will never, even if they wanted to be more committed, will have less opportunity because the priest is just not available to them because he's just so busy. He's trying his hardest. He's doing everything. And maybe he's being given a whole bunch of administrative tasks, which you don't have to be ordained to do. And that takes up more of his, not just time, but his energy, his emotional investment, all that kind of stuff. And so a priest shortage might also, it doesn't have to look like a priestless parish. It could also look like a really large parish with not enough clergy in it to cover
Right.
everybody.
Right. And
Yeah.
I would also, yeah, that's absolutely right. And I would add in, just as I said before, the kind of chilling effect that this will have on development of new missions, which is
Yes.
one of the ways where if you have a really big parish, I mean, in a kind of ideal scenario, that parish may start a mission, and some of, and I've heard of great success stories of parishes doing this. But, if you don't have enough priests, that's not really a viable option.
Yeah. Right. I mean, you think about if you're the bishop and you have a big parish that says, look, we're overcrowded and we want to start another parish nearby, he might say, okay, but it's going to be maybe years before you get a priest. Even if you have like 300 people in that new church on day one that could support a new priest, he might say, look, I don't care how much money you have. I don't have someone to send you.
Well, and that gets into something I don't want to jump the gun on this, but you just said about supporting a new priest is a really important piece here, because now I don't have as much data on this, but I do bring this up in the study, that there is a related problem, and it's a financial problem. It's an economic problem associated with the priest shortage. So I'll give an example. There's a parish that I mentioned in the study in a major metropolitan area. I'm not going to say what the area is, right? But it's a major metropolitan area. The parish has been around for a while, and they don't have a lot of money. They're not an absolutely booming community, but they're an important, there's no Orthodox parishes within reasonable driving distance. They serve an important function, right?
And it's stable. They're not shrinking or whatever.
Exactly. Yes. So the priest that's serving that parish is in his 70s, and he's only taking kind of a fraction, like half of whatever salary he might really need to be full time, because he's got other kind of retirement income, whatever, right? So that priest, now when that priest goes away, whether he retires or passes away, what happens to that parish? Because that parish is in a major metropolitan area. They don't have the income to, whether they should or shouldn't, different issue, right? They don't have the income to pay a living wage to a priest for that metropolitan area. So what happens to that parish, right? I mean, we could think about what those options are, but they're not pretty.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then if we're going to primarily rely on the MDiv sort of system to produce our priests, someone uprooting their family, moving to the Northeast to go to seminary for 3 years, which is expensive and burdensome, and then you're going to send them to a parish that can't pay them a living wage.
Yeah.
We're not going to solve the numbers problem.
There's all kinds of supply and demand issues there. And like another thing that we didn't mention, but we kind of implied, was like another effect of a clergy shortage. And I think the Roman Catholics have seen this, and by the way, I think we should spend at least a couple minutes talking about non-Orthodox clergy shortage, because that's totally a thing.
Yes.
Is that when you don't have enough clergy, but you still have existing living parishes where there's plenty of people in them, then sometimes what happens is parishes get merged, right? And so not only then are you creating that situation of the mega parish which is underserved effectively because of the Dunbar number, and just a lot of these people just can't connect, like I can't even get the priest on the phone. He can't, whatever, like, right, because he's just got so many people. But then also you have the growing pains of trying to merge existing communities. And then also the reality that some people maybe who lived, like, let's say you're taking that suburban parish, right? And you're going to merge it into the urban parish, which is the likely scenario, because the urban parish probably has a bigger building, whatever. There's people that lived not between those two, but they lived farther away on the other side of that suburb, and that was their closest church. And now they're going to have to drive another 20, 30, 40 minutes. And while there's going to be a bunch of people that are very committed, who'll be like, I'm going to drive, I guess I'm going to drive an hour to church now on Sunday, or 2 hours, or whatever it is. There's also going to be a bunch of people for whom that's a little too hard.
And there is data that when one of the reasons people leave their religion, leave their religious tradition, stop participating, is simply that they moved. It's not sort of dramatic ideological. There's lots of data. It's non-Orthodox data, but I've seen anecdotally in the Orthodox Church as well. That is a major factor. It's not exciting. It's not like culture wars or whatever. It's just, people moved.
Every priest can tell you that attendance goes down when it rains. Yes. And it's like, that shouldn't be. You still go to work when it rains. You still go to your job when it rains, your school when it rains. But it's just a reality that for a certain group of people, church has a certain level of optionality to it. And so if enough factors make it difficult, then I'm going to take the no option. And one of those factors might be the church is too far away now. I mean, I hear from people all the time, because of the evangelistic work that I do, that say, I would love to join the Orthodox Church. So here's another place we're losing. People who don't join, converts who don't happen because it's too far away. And a clergy shortage is going to affect this as well, because we're going to close parishes and merge them in, and we're going to not open those new parishes, because why would you, it's an economic problem. It's a supply and demand issue. Like, look, you have an established parish that can pay a priest well, or at least okay, and they're open, and you have a brand new thing that wants to start. Where is the bishop are you going to send that priest? It's going to be responsible, not just the responsible decision is to send him to the larger established parish. because there's probably more people there. So you're
Mhm.
shepherding more people. And frankly, father is going to get better taken care of economically, him and his family at that larger established parish. It would not be the smart decision as a spiritual father that the bishop is to send him instead to the place where it's going to be a big economic struggle. Now, maybe the priest is ready to do that. Maybe he says, I want to do missions. And the bishop might say, okay, I'm going to send you to that. But he might also say, look, I understand, Father, that that's in your heart, but I've got 3 times as many people over here.
Well, and also I've got existing vacancies. Sorry. I got slots that need to be filled.
Right. Right. And we don't need to create new vacancies when like that's just the sort of the economic reality of it. That even if we got people, like, here's another economic piece of it, is that frankly, Orthodox Christians do not give to their parishes at the rate that they should. If we all tithed, for instance, which by the way is like actually a biblical minimum. In the Old Testament, there were 2 1/3 tithes. So you're actually giving 23.3%. And then if you look at the early church fathers, when they talk about tithing, what they say is, yeah, that belonged to the old covenant, but now we give way more. That's what they say. Because you can hear some people say, oh, we don't have to tithe anymore because that was the old covenant. And so we give less. Right. It's just the way, but any of the early church fathers that address this, they'll say, no, now we give more. In fact, some of them will say, now we give everything, so that creates a problem too. But even if we did have all of our parishes actually tithe, where everyone was really giving that 10%, and we had plenty of money to pay all of our priests a good, solid living wage, that still would not address this problem
That's
very
exactly
well.
right.
Although we could talk about this, it will address it in a way where it becomes more valuable for a man to want to become a priest to begin with, because he knows that he's not going to be necessarily putting his family into a poverty situation or have to work a second job or his wife work or something like it.
Right.
Makes the priesthood more attractive, but that's kind of on the supply end. And we're talking about the demand at this point. So yeah. Okay. Let's talk about the non-Orthodox for just a second. So
Sure.
are the Orthodox unique in this regard? Like, are we unique in the United States of having a clergy shortage?
No, we are definitely not unique.
Yeah.
The Roman Catholics, if you Google priest shortage, you're going to get a bunch of articles about Roman Catholicism in America and the priest shortage the Roman Catholics are experiencing, which is pretty, if you look at the numbers, it's pretty catastrophic for them.
Oh, yes.
If you Google pastor shortage, what you're going to get is a bunch of articles about Protestantism having a pastor shortage crisis. So this is just a generalized phenomenon in American society, that there is a shortage of people who want to lead church communities, sort of, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. And also, like, on the supply side, then we talked about the amount of clergy that are being generated by our Orthodox seminaries. What about non-Orthodox seminaries? What are they doing?
Yeah, I mean, seminary education in America, if you look at the numbers from the Association of Theological Schools, ATS, is the accrediting body. That's kind of the dominant accrediting body for seminaries in the United States, sort of all different flavors, let's say.
Yeah.
Primarily heterodox, right? They're not.
Sure.
I mean, they do.
Sure.
Most of the Orthodox
Protestant
seminaries
mostly
are part
Protestant
of it.
seminaries. Yeah.
Right. So the ATS seminary enrollment across the board is down big time. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but you can actually look at their reports, their annual reports, and see these numbers. So seminary enrollment across the board is down. And if you Google seminary campus for sale or something like that, right? Or seminary closing or whatever, right? You're going to find these non-Orthodox seminaries around the country are closing. They're all experiencing, lots of them are experiencing financial crises. They're experiencing, declining enrollment. They don't have enough money. They're borrowing against their endowments. They can't afford their facilities, deferred maintenance, the whole narrative, right? And then when you look at a lot of our, we have a handful of seminaries, right? Couple of our biggest seminaries here in America, it's the same narrative. It's the same phenomenon. They're not unusual. We have one seminary that seems to be bucking that crisis trend, which I'll just say it is St. Tikhon's. St. Tikhon's seems to be in pretty good shape from a financial and administrative standpoint. Although their graduations of ordainable men are down. They're down 30 something percent compared to earlier in the 21st century, which is on par, sort of on track with Saint Vlad's is in the same boat. Of course, Saint Vlad's and Holy Cross are, I don't think it's any secret to say that they're undergoing, let's call it leadership transitions, I think is a fair way to characterize it, while also experiencing challenges involving their physical sort of location and find very large deficits on the sort of the income versus expenses, right? So big challenges, but they're not unique. This is common across the board in American religious sort of higher education, let's say.
Yeah. So, one of the questions I imagine people might have then is like, how did we get here? Like, what's going on to cause this problem that we're not even producing enough just to stay stable, to say nothing about growing. And yet, as we're experiencing this convert surge at the same time, it's kind of ironic. There's going to be more and more people served by fewer and fewer clergy.
Right. How do we get here? I mean, it's interesting. I mentioned this at the beginning of the report. The OCA started they might have been doing this earlier, but I know for a fact they started on their All-American Council sort of discussing and prioritizing the priest shortage crisis, right? In 1999. That's 25 years ago.
Okay.
And they rebooted that discussion 6 years later. And as far as I can tell, they didn't reference the discussion from 6 years earlier, but they were talking about it in 99. They were talking about it in 2005. The Greek Archdiocese was talking about it openly in 2005 as a problem that needed to be solved. So this is something that's been discussed and known about for decades. Most of the leadership from back then is gone. It's turned over, right? It's all different leadership.
Yeah.
The problem hasn't been solved, right? It's actually gotten worse.
It's getting worse.
The average age of Metropolitan Saba of the Antiochian Archdiocese last summer at the convention brought up the priest shortage crisis as a significant challenge that needs to be addressed. And in that address, he mentioned the average age of an Antiochian priest is 60. And I think that tracks with a lot of the other jurisdictions.
And I think talking about that of active, so not retired.
Active, correct. That is correct.
Antiochian priests, the average age is 60.
That is correct. So, we got an issue here. The other things, I bring up, so just again, general phenomenon in our society, right? Birth rates are going down, and they have been for a while. Yeah. Another factor is people are getting married at later ages, right? People are getting married when they're older.
So so that means not only fewer children, right? Because frankly, if a woman gets married older, she's going to have fewer children. So that's just a biological reality.
Basic math. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It means fewer children, but it also means for Orthodox clergy, since most of us are married, and you have to be married before you're ordained. Exactly. If you're delayed in getting married, then you're delayed in getting ordained as well, right. which is not a fewer of it creates fewer clergymen in the sense that they're just not as available. They're available for fewer years, so that creates a shortage as well.
Well, and related to that though is, so if you are young, back when people got married younger, they were going to seminary at a younger age. Ordination ages were uncanonically low, right? The typical priest was ordained in his 20s back early, in the mid 20th century. Yeah, that was normal.
And what a lot of people may not know is the canonical age for a priest to be ordained is 30. That he should be 30. But it's been very, very common in the United States, anyways. And I think in a lot of other countries, frankly,
yes,
to ordain men much younger, like in their early 20s in many cases, for various reasons, right? So that's just a reality. So canonical, uncanonical, the truth is if you get ordained older, then that means you have less priestly service available.
Well, but not just that. I think it has a general chilling effect on people choosing to pursue the priesthood.
Sure.
Because so one of the things I didn't, this is not in the study, this is on old articles that I wrote several years ago on orthodoxhistory.org, but the under age 30 priests, right? Priests getting ordained in their 20s has almost vanished, right? It
Wow.
used to be the norm. It's now almost gone away, right? So from a canonical perspective, you could say, well, that sounds good, right? Which, okay, good. The average age, and what this is for convert clergy and for sort of cradle Orthodox clergy, sort of either way,
Yeah.
the average ordination age now is about 38. That's the median age for ordination, right?
And if you think about that, a man becoming a priest at 38 years of age, he has probably had 15, 20 years of some other career.
Exactly. This is where I'm going.
Yeah. And if, again, like if you're at that decision point in your mid 30s, apparently, and you've established in some other career, and it's like, oh, okay, let me give you the option of having a much more economically unstable reality. You may have to go and spend 3 years on your own dime, move across the country. You probably got kids by that point.
Oh,
very
yeah.
likely. That makes it harder. That just makes it harder. And again, you might say, well, he should just have the call, you know, like, okay, sure. I mean, everybody should have the call, but again, when it rains on Sunday morning, there's fewer people in church.
Well, and we've created, what I think is important to understand, we've created an artificially high barrier to entry, right? Which you could debate whether that's desirable. That might be, the leadership might say, this is desirable. We want this high barrier to entry, but it is a particular kind of barrier to entry that says, you know, if you are someone who's got a career, you've got your stable life, you've got your kids, you've got a life with your family, and by the time you reach, let's say you haven't made the decision to become a priest and you're 40 years old, okay? You're 40 years old, you've got a career, you've got your family, you're not going to go to seminary. I mean, with very few exceptions, you're not going to seminary.
There
right?
are people,
if you converted 15 years ago, right, and you haven't gone to seminary yet, you're not going to seminary.
Yeah. The reality is, like, there are men who do, right? But on average, fewer will by that point in their lives. And also, like, there's something about a newly converted man. And frankly, almost every young man who converts to Orthodox Christianity, I mean, this is a reality, thinks about being a priest at some point along the way, which is obviously most of them should not be, right? That's just the reality.
Right.
But also, like, there's also a kind of law of diminishing returns too. Like, there's an enthusiasm right at the beginning that as the guy settles into church life, and maybe he's been Orthodox for a decade or more, the idea of I should be a priest within this context and not a parishioner, that idea wanes after a while.
So I refer to this. So I think I mentioned this in the study. If you look at the demographics of MDiv graduates who become priests, right? So they graduated from an Orthodox seminary with an MDiv, and they become a priest, an Eastern Orthodox, a Chalcedonian sort of priest. I'm going to set aside the non-Chalcedonians.
Yeah, these are the people
right?
that we're tracking because this is our church.
Right, and I think that's important too. Like St. Vlad's has kind of somewhat, not entirely, but somewhat mitigated against the declining enrollment by bringing in lots of non-Chalcedonians, lots of women, into, not lots, but more women into their MDiv program, and also offering other degree programs.
Right.
That's all fine, right? Do what you want to do, but that doesn't address our priest shortage, right? That's my concern. My concern is the priest shortage. So when we look at ordainable men, who are these people? They come from two relatively narrow groups: cradle Orthodox men in their 20s and sometimes in their 30s. If you're a cradle Orthodox man and you hit 40, I can think of like one or two exceptions off the top of my head, but like round down to zero, you're not going to seminary, right? Almost certainly you're not going to seminary.
On average.
Convert men in their 20s, 30s, once in a while in their 40s, And almost all of them converted to Orthodoxy in the between 5 and 15 years ago, right? So if you're a convert and you converted at 21 and you're now 40, right? You almost certainly are not going to seminary, right? You at some point along the way in the past 19 years, that decision, whether you consciously or just kind of it went away, like you didn't make the choice, opt into that path in your life. And now you've got a career. Now you've had some success in your life. Maybe you've become, whatever, right? Career-wise, you're making a decent living. You're taking care of your family. Your kids are doing okay. You're like happy at your parish. You're not going anywhere, right? Yeah. So that leads to what I would regard, and I refer to in this document as a market inefficiencies, right? These are market inefficiencies. So middle-aged men, right, 40 and up, let's say, who are either cradle Orthodox or longtime converts, right? They've been Orthodox 15 plus years, who chose not to attend seminary for whatever reason, and they've now established themselves. They have a secular career, etc. Many of these men, as I say in the document, are stable sort of leaders in their parish community, lay leaders in their parish community. You got chanters, they're serving in the altar, they're helping with parish council, they're maybe helping with catechism, right? They're active members of the community, right? And they're go-to godparents, right?
Yes,
it's the guy who sponsors, like somebody new every year who converts is getting sponsored by the same like group of men, right? Because those are like kind of the solid, stable backbones of their community, right? Yeah. Those guys are not going to go to seminary, right? They're not.
They're happy where they are.
Many of them, some of them now, like we do have these late vocations programs, right? So the Antiochians have the St. Stephen's program to sort of train deacons. There's other programs in different jurisdictions. OCA has some. We should talk about the ROCOR pastoral school for a moment at some point in this discussion, but ROCOR's got a path, right? There are these late vocations programs. Even those late vocations programs, many of these guys are not going to pursue them, right? Yeah. Because they're going to say, look, I have a busy job. I've got a family. I'm not going back to school.
I'm not going to, even if it's online. I'm not going to uproot my kids.
Well, even I'm talking late vocations is often distance learning, right? Yeah. So it's not, we're not even talking about, we're not even talking about going to seminary. Well, I'm talking about most of those guys aren't going to the St. Stephen's program in the Antiochian Archdiocese to become a deacon because they're just like, I don't really want to write papers, right? I quit writing papers. Look, I'm 40 years old. I'm cradle Orthodox. Now I'm not interested. I'm not a candidate for a clergy, right? But I'm not going back to school, right? I got a busy life. I'm not going back to school. So I think a lot of people are in that boat where they're not interested in writing papers, right? Which have, what is the relevance, by the way, of writing papers to being a good pastor? Throwing that out there.
Yeah. I mean, I think also like another factor in terms of how we got to the point where there's a shortage now is also just frankly a decline in church attendance. Because even while we're experiencing a convert surge, my sense is that overall we're seeing a decline. And also a convert surge does not immediately address the problem of parishioners who might become clergy. Now, God willing, the convert surge in 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, however many.
I'd say 10 years, 12 years. That you don't want new guys coming into the priesthood.
I'm sure it'll produce some clergy. There'll be some guys who'll be like, I converted during the pandemic or shortly after, and and now I'm going to seminary. But not yet. I mean, it's just too soon for that to have an effect.
Right.
So decline in church attendance, declining enrollment. So guys who are not going to seminary, which we talked about, the kind of economic problem of seminary education, that it costs money to go there that a man may not have.
Well, let me throw another one out there, Father, is enrollment in colleges and universities is also declining, right? So if you want the MDiv program to get in with let's forget about the exceptions. There are rare exceptions, but to get into an MDiv program, you need a bachelor's degree, right? That's a prerequisite.
So there's fewer bachelor's degrees.
If you went to what
being granted to men, especially.
Yeah, yes, that's right. Most college students are women.
Yeah. I think it's 50, 55, 60%. It's something really, it's a significant imbalance in terms of who's getting bachelor's degrees. It's not 50-50. There's a very strong tilt towards
Right.
women at this point. That's just
And
the reality.
also only it's less than 40%. It's going down, but it's less than 40% of college age uh, people in America, college age 18 to 22 or whatever, go to college, right? So a minority of college age people go to college, and most of those that are going to college are women, right? And the numbers are all kind of dropping right now. And as we see the upheavals in higher ed, I don't think that trend is going to kind of reverse itself anytime soon. So that means fewer people have the credential necessary to get into an MDiv program, even if they wanted to. That guy who might 25 years ago have gone to college is now maybe going to go to vocational school where he doesn't have to take on massive debt and whatever, and he comes out and has a solid job as an electrician or a welder or whatever, right?
And
So
probably makes more money than his priest.
yes, right, and so that guy, it's not even on the table for him because he doesn't have a bachelor's degree.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So, okay, you mentioned earlier like that at least a few of the jurisdictions have openly talked about this question 20 something years ago. Um, were there any solutions proposed at the time, and has anything been like pursued?
My impression, and I don't have like transcripts of discussions or anything, right? My impression is that when this topic gets brought up, often the response is we need to do more to encourage men to enroll in seminary, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, well, that's nice, but it's not a solution,
Right.
right?
I mean, it's like your priest saying, you should really think about seminary, right? That's important. That's an important piece of the puzzle, right? And in fact, this is talked about a lot, right? They'll often say things like, you don't call yourself, the church calls you, which, like, okay, that's important. And although I like to offset that, because some people often hold up St. John Chrysostom, who very famously ran from even being a priest, while he was also doing some kind of holy deception to get his friend to become a priest. So I'll just put that out there, by the way. His friend Basil, not Basil the Great, but another Basil.
Mhm.
People point to you should run from it, and so on and so forth. And like, I mean, there's a certain sense in which that's all well and good, but also it says in the scripture that he who desires to be bishop desires a good work. And so, like, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be a priest. It's wrong if, like, you want it because you want the glory, although let me tell you, it's not that glorious.
Or authority.
Authority, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like who when was the last time someone actually did something because the priest stood up in the pulpit and said, this is what you should do? Um, most people don't just do whatever the priest says. That's just not even a thing. I mean, that does exist, but it's really not that much of a thing. Um, so right, there can be this inner desire, and I think there should be a desire to do that work, to do the work of a priest, right? And to be clear what that work is. And the ranges of work that can be. Like, there's a lot of different ways of being a priest. Although today we're talking mainly about parish priests pastoring parishes.
Well, actually, the priest shortage. I mean, the part of the problem with the priest shortage is it makes it harder to have priests doing other important work that isn't just pastoring a parish. Like what
Right.
you have a job that is, your priesthood is very important to that, but you're not pastoring a parish.
Right.
But if the priest shortage gets worse and worse, how many more priests could we use potentially in other contexts?
Right. So
Not as parish priests.
It's opportunity cost for other kinds of roles, which it's funny. Like, I think in the US, we're so used to clergy just being parish clergy that I remember when I started working for Ancient Faith, I had a bunch of people that asked me, are you not a priest anymore? And I was like, no, I'm a priest who does this other job. And in countries which are traditionally Orthodox, historically Orthodox, and the church is much more established, having clergy doing other kinds of jobs is way more normal, way main. It's pretty much standard, in a lot of places. But we're so used to a shortage that we can't imagine that there's anything else that clergy could be doing, you know? So yeah, so it seems like encourage young men, like again, this is a significant piece of the puzzle to want to do it, but a responsible man, which is the kind of man you want to ordain, presumably, a responsible man will also ask these other questions. Will I be able to provide for my family? Will, if we're called to move across the country, is that doable for us? Do I have family that needs us? Um, can I
Well, yeah,
afford it?
a priest. I mean, there's understandable apprehension on the part of many men about the prospect of being essentially property of a jurisdiction or of a
Right?
hierarch, where you could potentially, in some cases, be moved literally anywhere in the United States, right, at a moment's notice, and you have no real say over that.
Yep.
I'm not necessarily gonna. I mean, it's one thing if you're already a priest, you're a man under authority, okay. But if I'm not a priest, do I want to put myself under that kind of
It's
authority
it's
when
like
I've
joining the
got
military. It's like
kids
joining the
and I've got
military.
family?
It's
Yeah,
like joining the military, and in a certain sense, not in every way, but in this way,
that's what
like,
it's become. I don't think that's what it has to be, but that's what
yeah,
it's become
yeah,
in
yeah.
many cases.
And also, I should say, especially we're talking about like encouragement. Um, there's an old joke amongst I've heard. I'm not going to point out where I heard it from, but there's an old joke, like talking to some, a mother, who's raising her son, like, why don't you encourage him to go to seminary and be a priest? And she responds, well, I know how I treat my priest, and no one's going to treat my son that way. So
That's
there's
awesome.
also the reality, right? So that's a
Yeah.
joke, but there's the
It's a
reality.
thankless job.
There's a reality that can be a very thankless job, and it can be not only thankless, but very emotionally difficult. Like there's whole books. Like there's a book I think called "When Sheep Attack," which I don't think it's
Oh,
not an Orthodox book, but it's basically about clergy being abused by their congregation.
yeah.
Which is this is totally a thing. And so if people grow up in a context in which the priest's job doesn't even look like something you would want, you know, that also creates a supply problem, as well. Um, so yeah, I mean, these numbers are pretty scary. Um,
Right. And they're
and
they're they're scary and they're imminent, which means we don't really have time to wait another 5 years or 10 or 25 as we've been waiting, right? And kind of putz around and make adjustments at the margins and maybe like, oh, maybe we need a better, effectively, it's a marketing push, right, for our seminary programs. There's
yeah,
also been speculation. I mean, let me just say it. Like, there was talk several years ago, even recently. I think people still talk about it sometimes. Hey, what if one of the major seminaries were to move to Texas? Let's say, right? Well, maybe that'll solve it, right? But okay, maybe moving a seminary out of the Northeast and putting it in the middle of the country adds a few seminarians, right? But we need, like, if you tripled seminary enrollment right now, we would be running a deficit.
yeah,
The seminaries are not they can't be the only solution, right?
right.
If that is a sort of stark reality that we all have to face, we, like, whoever's in leadership, at least in decision making roles, again, you could triple seminary enrollment and we would be running a deficit.
Yeah. Okay. So it's been a pretty bleak conversation so far. But I think it's important to have a bleak conversation if the reality is bleak. Um, so yeah,
We have to understand the problem so that we can then formulate solutions, right?
right. We
And
can't just kick the
we
can down the road. We can't pretend like this is not a problem, or just say, well, we'll just pray really hard, and like absolutely we should be praying, right? But we should also be working. God gave us brains and hearts and hands and wallets, to work on these things, to be his works in the world, so okay, so let's talk about some solutions.
yeah,
We have a very immediate, because nothing was done 30 years ago, or at least not enough was done. We have an immediate problem now,
right.
right? So not only do you have parishes that are unstaffed, but understaffed, underserved, like some jurisdictions, the parishes are so large on average that no one really realizes that constitutes a clergy shortage, but it does. It really does. If there's only just, if he's way past his Dunbar number, that's a clergy shortage, period. Right.
Yes.
So a lot don't even know. They've just accepted this model, a model of actual shortage is normal.
Right.
So we need short-term solutions. We need long-term solutions so we can deal with the problems in the system. What are some short-term solutions that are possible, that are being proposed or discussed, or should be proposed or discussed to deal with this problem right now, so that we don't have to start closing parishes, number one, and merging them into larger churches or whatever it is maybe, and so that we can take opportunities for missions and send someone there.
Right. So the obvious sort of, at least for some jurisdictions, the most, what will feel like the easy solution, let's put it that way, right, will be grabbing deacons and making them priests. So we have seen, one of the interesting things is that over the past 20, 25 years, 30 years, we've seen an incredible growth in diaconal ministry in America.
That's interesting.
Metropolitan Philip, I think it was even in the early 80s that he started kind of promoting the diaconate, establishing the St. Stephen's program, this sort of thing to train future deacons. When I was growing up in the Antiochian Archdiocese in the 80s and 90s, deacons were almost like, it was like a unicorn. You never saw a deacon.
I remember talking to one very senior deacon, and he told me that when he was ordained, I think in the 70s, that on the day that he was ordained, he was the second most senior deacon in the archdiocese, meaning that there was only one deacon in the archdiocese and he was the second on that day. And now I think, and this is in the study, one of the statistics is that, like, for the Antiochians, we have now 0.81 deacons per parish.
That's right. So it's been one of the big, in the midst of this big priest shortage crisis, we have this success story here where there has been this, at least in the Antiochian context for sure, this rapid growth in the diaconate, where now it is become almost like it's the norm in the Antiochian Archdiocese for there to be a deacon in the parish.
You almost
in ROCOR,
don't see a parish without a deacon now.
That's right. In ROCOR, there are similar numbers, especially in the Eastern American diocese and in the Chicago diocese of ROCOR. They've had a huge, increase in the number of deacons. They're close to Antiochian levels. ROCOR Western American diocese, interestingly, has fewer numbers of deacons. The OCA has about 0.4 deacons per parish, so it's about half the rate of the Antiochians, but there still has been a growth in diaconal ministry. The Greek Archdiocese has by far the lowest rate of deacons per parish. But even in the Greek Archdiocese, interestingly, there's been growth. If you compare the number of deacons in the GOA for today to what it was 20 years ago, unquestionably there's been growth. And you can do that if you want to go through old directories and count numbers of deacons, you can do that.
This is the kind of stuff that you did for this study.
This is the sort of thing I do for fun.
1, 2, and like actually count.
Sometimes that's what it takes.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is sometimes the data is out there. You don't have to take a survey. You just have to read what's published.
Right. Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's a lot of freely available information that simply needs to be collected and curated and studied. So I think that the diaconate, on the one hand, it's the obvious solution, right? You've got all these men who are ostensibly they're canonically eligible, right? Because they're already clergy. So all you have to do is make them a priest. Now, I think some percentage of our existing deacons are probably priest material, but not all. I mean, the diaconate, and what I don't want to see is sort of the diaconate kind of wiped out to solve a short-term problem, a problem in the short term. Yeah. One is deacons have an important function in the church, and right. I don't want to lose what we've gained with there. The other is that some people are a lot of people simply called to be deacons. They're not called to be priests, right. And that's not a knock on them. That's a different ministry, and that's something that God has called them to do. Yeah. And pressing them into service as priests. I mean, one of the problems we face in the Orthodox Church at times is having to press people into service at a higher level than God has necessarily called them to be in, right? And it's not that they're bad people, but maybe they're in a role that's not right for them.
Yeah. Well,
and we don't need more of that.
Related to that is that the model of the priesthood that we generally have here in America is that the priest is not only expected to do the stuff that his ordination gives him to do, which is frankly the services, the sacraments. And that's what ordination gives you the authority to do under the bishop, right? They're also expected to be pastoral counselors. They're also expected to be administrators. Often they're expected to be kind of social organizers.
Teachers, catechists.
Fundraisers, all of these things, right? And so as a result, what you get is this role that even if you could ordain a man who could do the services, he may think, and his bishop may think, well, he's not really the right guy for these other kinds of things. Like, can you imagine that guy hearing a confession? Oh no, but like, it's a truth that in a lot of Orthodox countries, for instance, when a man is ordained to the priesthood, he is not a confessor on the day that he's ordained. There are, in fact, in some places, I'm told in Greece that confessors are only a minority of clergy, only a minority of priests actually have the blessing to hear confessions, that your parish priest may not have that blessing.
Well, and homilies is another one. St. Raphael Hawawini, when he was sort of briefly came back from seminary to the Patriarchate of Antioch, he was, because he had a theological education, he was made the patriarch made him a traveling preacher, and he would go around. St. Nectarius did this on the island of Evia, right, where he's traveling around giving homilies, because the average parish priest isn't authorized to give homilies.
Right. And it's interesting to think about that. Like, what if you have someone whose job is a traveling preacher? Here in America, we're like, what would you even need that for? Because all clergy are expected to preach. Frankly, some of them shouldn't, or like they're doing their best or whatever, but
you're not an orator. Not everyone's an orator.
Right. Not everyone has that gift or that training, frankly. And in many cases, the seminaries are not really training people that well to be good homilists, even though a homily is actually a key liturgical moment in the divine liturgy. So I think that's one of the things also that, as we think about short-term solutions, and maybe this is a long-term solution thing too, there may be priests who are ordained to serve the services, to serve the sacraments, but are maybe not given a blessing to do some of these other things. Like maybe he's not given a blessing to hear confession. And so you send in a confessor who visits the parish once every few months or whatever and confesses everybody. Like, this is totally a thing that already exists in other places in the Orthodox
That's
world.
right. This is already, I think that's important. This is not a new concept.
Right.
It's not this idea, and let me throw a couple other things out related to this. So like in the Patriarchate of Antioch, right, there's a lot of people know that there's the St. John of Damascus theological school, which is connected to the Balamont, the University of the Balamont, right?
Yeah.
What I think a lot of people don't necessarily think about is that the Patriarchate in Lebanon and Syria, just Lebanon and Syria, has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of parishes, right?
Yeah.
Almost very few of those priests are going to the Balamont, right? If you're a village priest, you're not going to go to the Balamont, right? And live there and go to seminary there. What are you going to do? Well, each archdiocese, and over there, archdiocese is geographically tiny, right? We don't think about, Lebanon and Syria put together are the size of Nebraska. Okay.
Right. But
there's
they
some
have
mountains, but
they have millions of Orthodox Christians,
or at least now hundreds of thousands.
At least hundreds of thousands. Yeah, I can't remember the last numbers, but yeah, the war is kind of mixed.
But you have hundreds of parishes, right? So you've got these, but the geographic area is really tiny, right?
Really
but there's a bunch of archdioceses within that small geographic area. Each one of those has a theological institute, which is a non-residential training program that gives future village priests enough training to be able to serve a local parish, but those people are not going to go on to become dean of a big cathedral. They're not going to go on to become bishops, right? You got to go to the Balamon for that. But if you're just going to serve your village, your village church, and you have another source of income, right? You're not getting a full-time sort of salary necessarily from the local community. This is also in the 1970s. Church of Greece in the 1970s was facing priest shortage issues, and their solution was something. They had kind of tiers of clergy. Some of which were, okay, look, if you get a certain level of training and education, you can be like a big city priest. But a certain level, I think Cyprus has some similar models. Certain level, you're not going to be the big city dean of the cathedral, proistomenos of a big church, but you can serve your local parish, your village. You may be second priest, third priest, fourth priest in another church, that kind of thing, right? You may not be able to hear confessions. You may not be able to give homilies, but at least people are able to have the divine liturgy served, etc.
Yeah, and then, like in our context, then the parish doesn't have to close.
Right. So that is probably, and I don't know, I mean, we start segueing into long-term solutions, sort of finishing on short-term, right? This is already happening.
Yeah.
Deacons who didn't go to seminary are being ordained priests right now.
Yes,
right.
That's right.
In various jurisdictions. It's not jurisdiction specific. This is just happening, right?
Yep.
Now, one of the few jurisdictions that I think is not really experiencing the same kind of priest shortage problem is ROCOR.
Okay.
Right? So you say, well, why is ROCOR? What's different about ROCOR?
Yeah,
right?
And it's interesting because, and people should know, like, even though I think maybe in Orthodox in the internet, ROCOR looms very large for whatever reason. A lot of very vocal, clergy and so forth in the ROCOR. Their numbers, like how many they have, what, about 125 parishes in America?
I think it's pushing 200 now.
Okay.
They are growing, but they're tiny, right? A lot of ROCOR parishes are really small.
Very small.
I mean, some of them are bigger, but a lot of them are small mission communities, priests that are bivocational, that kind of
thing. So it's a relatively small jurisdiction, not just worldwide, but in America. It's not one of the biggest ones. It's not.
I think it's the fourth largest if you're just going by number of parishes, but if you're going by kind of number of faithful, it's going to be further down on the list.
Yeah. So that's at least a useful piece of context. So what is their model like? I mean, they have a seminary
yes.
at Jordanville. Now that seminary serves the entire planet, because ROCOR theoretically covers the planet. Sort of here we are in the 21st century. That's just the way that it is. A lot of Orthodox churches are kind of covering the planet right now.
Yeah.
And they offer, I think it's bachelor's degrees, although I think
they do have a master's program, but it only produces two or three seminarians per year.
Okay.
Are coming out of that.
But yeah, their sort of standard program is a bachelor's program. But they also have this pastoral school in Chicago.
Well, it's the Chicago Diocese of ROCOR created several years ago, an online pastoral school, which is it's sort of like the Antiochian, Lebanon, Syria Theological Institute, right? But it's all online, right? Now there are other online programs. Antiochian House of Studies is a thing. So but let's just focusing on ROCOR. So ROCOR it started this program. It's an online sort of program where, a man in his parish, right, who's kind of working with his parish priest, but he's able to take classes online, church history, theology, patristics, all of that sort of thing, right? And then can come out of it. Now, it's not accredited. There's no accreditation. You're not getting a degree, right? You're getting, I don't know if it's a certificate or what, but you're coming out of that program and you've been prepared. And there's other aspects where you're doing things in your community. So it's not entirely sort of an online thing. And you're coming out of that with a credential that allows the bishop to say, okay, this guy has some preparation for clerical ministry, right? Whether it's a deacon or a priest. So that is particularly utilized in the Eastern American Diocese of ROCOR and in the Midwest Diocese of ROCOR, which incidentally are where we see large numbers of deacons. And I think there's probably a connection there between those. And I think because of that, what's happened is there is a path. It isn't a super high barrier to entry. It's not very expensive, right? It's very cost effective. It doesn't require physically moving your family, but also, ROCOR. There's not necessarily the expectation that if you become a priest in ROCOR, you're going to be a full-time priest, right? You may have to have another source of income or what have you.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's interesting to think about these online programs in comparison to like what you talked about in the Middle East, because those are not, I don't know, they might have some online component, but again, like you said, the archdioceses are very, very, geographically small. Like you can drive from one end of your diocese to another, in many cases, in like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Like there are dioceses that are basically large neighborhoods,
Yeah.
And some are bigger for sure, but so it's not equivalent, but there's a similarity in that the goal is kind of the same, which is let's get a guy qualified to be a priest. He may not have a blessing to do all the things, although I think in the ROCOR they pretty much do. If you're a priest, you have a blessing to do all the things.
Right.
Generally speaking, that's my impression. I haven't checked. But it's aimed at making priests, and it's not aimed at getting a degree. It's not aimed at fulfilling any ATS's accreditation requirements. It's basically job training. It's job training is how it's really understood.
It's like a vocational program. I mean,
right.
But I think it's important to think about when we think about these kinds of solutions. There are let's say intellectual kind of maybe intellectual is the wrong word. There's like an academic side to priest training, right? That tends to be emphasized a lot, right? If you're going for if you want to have an accredited degree, that's because like for whatever reason you care about the academics, right? I think ROCOR is offering, and I've never studied what exactly the content of the material is, but if you look at the course lists and stuff, they're offering kind of an academic program, but the goal is not sort of any kind of, you're not getting an academic credential out of this, right? So there's the academic side of becoming a priest, and then there's the kind of people skills, the practical, what do you do when someone comes to you having a crisis in their life, right? Bereavement, marriage collapsing, they've experienced abuse, right? Whatever it is, there's a crisis. Or what do you do when you need to, how do you counsel people? How do you, right? All the things that kind of, some seminaries are working on training for those kinds of things.
Yeah, but largely, I mean, it's kind of it's a cliche. These are all the things they didn't teach me in seminary, and it turns out that all the things they didn't teach me in seminary, or maybe they spent only a little bit of time on, that's most of the job.
Right. You don't really need to talk about Maximus the Confessor to be a good priest.
Right.
But you really need to have emotional intelligence.
Right. Now, you really do need to learn to talk about Maximus the Confessor to be a Twitter theologian. I mean, this is established. You don't have to understand it. Just claim that you do, But but no, it's true. Like it's true that most of what that doesn't mean that we shouldn't, that the clergy don't need to understand the church fathers or any of that kind of stuff.
Right.
But the application should be, especially for a parish priest, that's the job. That's the main thing, especially if a priest is not going to be just serving services, and is going to be doing all these things, and is the guy that the people come to when they're having some kind of crisis in their lives. And they do. Like there's a sense, most people have a sense of, this guy was ordained, it's appropriate for me to talk to him about a big spiritual crisis. He may not be trained. He may not have the emotional intelligence.
And so that's the thing. So I would argue, I'm just giving my opinion here, that you should know church history before you go into a program to become a priest. You should not be learning the history of the church or the basic theology of the church while you're training for the priesthood. So we can, you want to learn that, great. We can establish programs to learn. Right? That's just being an Orthodox Christian that wants to learn. You should know all this stuff. You should know church history pretty well, right? You should have read the saints and church fathers and understand basic Christology, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Right? This seminary should not be the place you're learning this. Whatever the program is going to be, programs are going to be plural, right? That are in the future. I think the emphasis needs to be on those skills that are going to be most crucial in being a good pastor.
Yeah,
Right.
because
So if
this
we
is the
focus on that, right, we should be designing programs. One of the ways I used to work in baseball analytics, and there's this sort of saying that I remember one guy would say a lot. If we weren't doing it this way, would we do it this way? Right? If we didn't already have these programs and structures in place, how would we do it? Because it is not the holy tradition of the church to have priests go through MDiv programs.
right.
That is the MDiv model really emerges out of the 1960s. Okay,
Yeah.
1960s and 70s. It is not an old ancient tradition.
No.
So push that aside, right? So if we weren't doing it this way and we said, okay, we want to find good, stable, mature, pious men, and we want to make sure that all of our priests are good, stable, mature, pious men. What do we need to do? What kind of on the front end screening do we need to do? And I would argue that understanding theology, understanding church history, that kind of thing should be done on the screening end. We shouldn't be teaching them that while they're going through a priest training program. We should screen for that.
Yeah, and because then, I was going to say, as one of the reasons I think that that's problematic in seminary training, and I'm not knocking the seminary training I got, but I think that one of the reasons it's problematic is that a lot of men who graduate with a master's degree, now it's an MDiv, which is not the same thing as an MA or whatever else, MTH, that graduate with a master's degree think that they are like an expert now in whatever the thing was their favorite class in seminary. Like I'm a patristic scholar now, or I'm a liturgical scholar now, or whatever. It's like, no, you're not, right? You're just not. And I think that one of the effects of having this strong academic emphasis, although it's actually not super deep, honestly, it's not super deep because you're trying to cover so many things.
An MDiv doesn't qualify you to get a PhD.
No,
also you'll have to do remedial work.
Yeah, I mean, a PhD program might accept an MDiv, but they don't not. It's not an academic degree; it is a professional degree. And so the question is, what is the profession? Is it to be have an introductory knowledge of all of these important but kind of more academic things? So I think that that's one of the difficulties of making it so academically focused that you get people who think that they are academics when they come out.
Right.
And I mean, I think academics done well and faithfully and traditionally, according to the Orthodox tradition, is a very important part of the Orthodox community and tradition. But we don't need our priests to be academics, and certainly not to be kind of pseudo academics, frankly.
So if we were on the screening end, as we're making sure people don't have a criminal record or whatever, right? We're also making sure that they have basic aptitude in certain areas, right? They understand church teachings. They understand things right at the front end. You can also test for emotional intelligence. There are evaluations that you can do to establish, okay, does this guy have the raw materials to be a pastor or not, right? You can do deep dive, and some jurisdictions do this, right? But like deep dive, kind of talking with people in their community and so forth to make sure these people are really kind of leaders, right? These are elders, right? Presbyters, right? Future presbyters of their communities, right? Are these the elders of the community, really? And if you do that on the front end, then once they enter a program, I'm not saying don't talk about theology, don't talk about church history, of course. Right? You could put a lot more emphasis on the kind of skills necessary specific to the priesthood, right? But that's going to imperil, if you're a seminary, your ATS accreditation.
Yeah.
Which I'm just going to throw this out there. What are we getting for ATS accreditation?
I think it's
what
prestige.
Benefit? But who cares?
Yeah,
right?
I think it's prestige.
It's like prestige in what? I think there's a perception that ATS accreditation has this higher value, that like an accredited degree. But these systems are all kind of collapsing, right? I mean, even now, higher ed is in a state of kind of crisis, right? And so I think we have to make a choice here about what do we want these future priests to be, right?
Yeah. And I think
if we do this right, we can boost the numbers.
Yes,
right.
right. I think
That's the key here.
I think that, one of the temptations, of course, is you have a shortage, you have a need. So let's lower our standards so that we can let more guys in. But I think that that's the wrong approach. And it's going to be a temptation.
Yeah.
Just because you have enough clergy to cover all of your parishes doesn't mean that they're appropriate.
Right.
Because it's not just about getting warm bodies in there or some guy who can say, "Blessed is our God." It's about taking care of the people of God. And if you put in a bunch of unqualified people, if you lower your standards, in other words, and then ordain these men, then you are going to harm your churches.
Absolutely.
In various ways.
This is the scary thing, because the priest has an outsized impact on a young person's relationship to Christ, right?
Yes.
If you have a bad priest, he says one wrong thing to an inquirer, to anyone, right? He says something wrong one time, he screws up. And that can destroy a person's relationship to the church.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a terrifying thing.
Or someone who's not, for instance, not trained as a professional counselor, not realizing what the limits of pastoral counseling are.
Yep.
And maybe not even being good enough to do that. Right. Not just because you're pastor doesn't mean you're a pastoral counselor, because the kind of in-depth counseling that some people need is beyond pastoral counseling.
Yeah.
And someone who thinks that because he's ordained, or because maybe he even took a pastoral counseling course, that means he can deal with really difficult issues that people have, like really, really tough things that are really ingrained, the kind of things where people want to kill themselves or like really, really difficult stuff that can literally kill.
Yeah, it's dangerous.
Send people off on tangents, And so I think it's really important that as we feel the pressure of a loss of supply, that we don't say, well, let's go ahead and just water down the supply so we can have more of it.
So my suggestion, and it's just a suggestion, would be, I don't think we should abolish the seminaries. I think we do need the seminaries. I think they serve an important function.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a both and approach, not an either or approach, that needs to be looked at. We need to have a suite of solutions available to the churches, to the jurisdictions, not just kind of one size fits all. Metropolitan Saba has been I've talking about, as he's traveled around the country, wanting to have, and the Antiochians have more deacons than any other jurisdiction. He wants to have even more deacons, right?
Yeah.
We need to find more.
I had a conversation with him. I love talking to him, actually. He's a really remarkable man. But I had a conversation with him and he said, I want to have a lot more deacons. That the idea that, because now we're almost to the point where we have one deacon per parish on average. I think he's envisioning 3 or 4 or 5 per parish, probably. Yep. He didn't say that to me, but that's the impression I got. He says we need more deacons, I think that's doing more ministry.
That is a viable path to a solution here, because if you do some basic math, and I did it in here, if you say, okay, we have 2,000 parishes, let's say that on average there are 2 or 3, and it's probably actually more, but 2 or 3 sort of mature, pious, established, middle-aged men in each parish who are kind of sort of realistically candidates for the priesthood, right? Now, or at least candidates to become clergy of some kind. If we can sort of build the mechanisms to identify those people, to vet them, to train them for a clerical role, whether it's deacon or priest, we will solve the priest shortage. And also, those guys all have jobs. They all have careers. They're not going to cost us a whole bunch of money that we don't have right now in our parishes. So economically, it works really well. They're also, but they're also sort of proven individuals. They've proven themselves. They're established. And you're talking about people over age 40 and people who've been Orthodox for a long time. You're not cannibalizing the seminaries, right? You're not competing with the seminaries, because none of those people are going to seminary anyway already, right? So it's a both and kind of thing, right? If you are 30 years old and you feel called to the priesthood, I think you should probably, if you're in your 20s or early 30s or whatever, you probably should go do the formation aspect of residential seminary. I think that's everybody I talk to in kind of church leadership, clergy that I talk to, they all emphasize the formation that takes place in seminary. And I think that's really important. There's another kind of formation that comes from being Orthodox for a really long time.
Yes.
That's that. I have a formation. I didn't go to seminary, right? There are other people like me. So I think we need to be aware of that as thinking about that as an option. I think that Metropolitan Saba is sort of saying we need more deacons. Well, some percentage of those will prove themselves worthy of the priesthood.
Yeah,
they will emerge, right? I don't want to say cream rise to the top because I don't want to say the others are bad, but I mean the priests of the group of deacons will sort of reveal themselves, right, through their work, through the ministry.
And another thing is that when a parish is better served, so they're not underserved, but they're better served. So not that clergy is the only solution. There's a lot of kinds of ways that parishes need to be served by lay people as well. That's another discussion, a very, very, very important discussion, because I think that most parishes are probably underserved by the laity as well.
Yes.
But when a parish is better served by its clergy, say multiple deacons, multiple priests, whatever, especially in a larger church, then what you get then is the commitment level of the parish can be higher. The average person is more likely to go to church more often. They're more likely to come to confession. They're more likely to give better in terms of their service and their money. And so what you're doing then is you're not just filling vacancies, you're actually ministering better. And then that also has dividends that come out of that, right? You can have an income increase. The more committed people are in the parish, the better they give. That is just the reality. And you're also going to be generating more clergy, because the better tended a flock is, the more that there's going to be some shepherds that are going to rise up within that flock. And so
and we create a pipeline through this, is what you're talking. You create a pipeline that where the people that sort of show themselves to be good leaders and servants of the church are then able to be given greater responsibility and identified, get to know the bishop, get to know, this emerges over time. It's an organic solution. It's a much more grassroots approach than we currently have. But it may be a more long-term sustainable model.
Yeah. And I'll also say, like, that idea of, like, the priest should be encouraging the young men in the parish, towards the priesthood. Not every priest is good at that kind of discernment.
Yeah.
Frankly.
Yeah.
And so if you have multiple clergy within a parish, then you can get multiple points of view on any given man who's a potential candidate for ordination.
I mean, there is a drawback of potentially, someone who has a narrow experience of orthodoxy, being in sort of just one parish for all those years. And one of the things I hear is, seminary, you get this bigger experience of orthodoxy, right? You see a bigger picture, you're interacting with more people. I think that if one of the dangers in our current crisis is that we start making kind of knee-jerk reactions and kind of quick solutions, and we're just grabbing people and ordaining them. And that's really dangerous. So I think if we are going to go down a path, and we have to, of alternative models, they need to be kind of designed with all of we think, what are the best aspects of seminary? How do we take those and manifest them in a different context, right? How do we make sure that these guys that they are getting the formation they need, that they are getting the exposure to a broader vision of orthodoxy than just their local parish, those kinds of things. We have to think about that. We have to be intentional about that. I don't think there's any reason why we can't. We just have to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think that, I think that a mentorship element is really important. And is part of it, is a formation, right? Like, we shouldn't say that formation is a thing that happens in seminary and nowhere else. And it might be possible, like every parish priest may not be a good mentor.
Right.
So you could have, for instance, a regional, like the dean or whoever, as a kind of the mentor for the young men or the middle-aged men, whatever, maybe the old men that are potential ordination candidates, and their job is not only to mentor these candidates, but then also, frankly, to mentor the new clergy. You're the guys
Right.
who've just been assigned. Well, it's not just you and the bishop. I mean, the bishop, frankly, if he's in America, the bishop probably has a diocese that is gigantic. Almost
Right.
every bishop does. They're gigantic dioceses. Um, but they probably have some other senior clergyman kind of in their area who could be this mentor figure and could help to make sure that they're not only prepared well and or the appropriate person to be prepared, then prepared well, but then also that they're minded after they're ordained and assigned somewhere, that they continue to have guidance. Because I mean, I can tell
Right.
you, like I've been a priest for almost 18 years now, but I got to serve 2 years as an assistant, and I am so glad that I got to do that. And that's not the only model for mentorship by a senior priest is as an assistant priest somewhere. There are other potential models. Like someone could be a pastor because you needed a pastor. So you sent that guy there, but he's got someone who is his mentor that's been assigned by the bishop, senior clergyman in his area. He meets with him regularly, talks to him regularly. It might even be his father confessor, who knows? But someone that's there to keep them on the right path, because it's not like, the moment you're ordained, like bam, everything is great. There is a lot of learning that happens. Most of the learning happens, I think, after that point, frankly,
And
in
that
terms of the day-to-day
deanery
life.
system, which a lot of the jurisdictions, almost all of them, have some kind of form of a deanery sort of system with local sort of regional deans. In addition to the priest shortage, we do have a shortage of bishops, right? But as you said, bishops have these vast geographic areas that they're covering. Yeah. The fact that we have this position of dean, where it's a senior respected clergyman, usually it's someone with a lot of experience and so forth, activating and utilizing these existing structures could be a wonderful solution. And it also can help on the vetting side, where you have the local deanery is playing an important role in vetting the people that are going to come out of that to become clergy.
And can help to give that broader experience, that experience beyond the parish.
Right.
And I would hope that it wouldn't just be beyond the parish to other parishes of the same jurisdiction where that's a possibility, but but be like, look, we're all Orthodox. So we have to live together. We don't yet have a unified structure. Okay. But let's do it as much as we can. Let's connect to other parishes as much as we can. And, have those new priests serve around at various jurisdictions and get a sense of their customs and be like, okay, this is what's normal for them. This is what's normal for us. That's cool. Because frankly, you're going to have parishioners who move from one jurisdiction to another and don't even think of themselves largely as moving from one jurisdiction to another. They usually think like, oh, the music here is different, or the food
they're just going
different.
to the local Orthodox church. Yeah. Well, so I think to sort of sum up my own perspective on the solutions. I don't think, I've pitched a solution here. I'm not saying that's the solution.
Yeah.
What I think we need to do is not just having these conversations, and the people in leadership having these conversations, which they are. I know that some leaders, Metropolitan Saba is very open about this. But also like we've got to start implementing, right? We got to start, and we may have to iterate. We may have to, learn a little bit through an iterative process, but we have to do something. And the one thing we can't do, two things. One is just say, let's encourage people to go to seminary. That's not enough. It's not going to be solved. It's not going to solve. It hasn't worked. Not going to work now.
Yeah.
The other thing that we can't do, I think we have to avoid the temptation to do, is just start ordaining people left and right in a panic. Because if we don't take steps now to address this issue, that will be what happens. Right? I don't think we're going to necessarily, it's just not palatable to close dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of parishes. It's just, or merge them, or it's just not going to happen. What'll happen is either they're empty and doing reader services and having a liturgy once or twice a month, or we're starting to ordain in a panic. And then we get down a very dark path, I think. So getting out ahead of this, even though we're behind the 8 ball already, getting out ahead of this is to the extent that we can, and being intentional about what we do, whatever we do, being intentional about it, I think is the important thing.
Yeah. And my opinion, again, this is my opinion. So I don't know if anybody really important is going to listen to this or watch it. They might, but my opinion, you leaders, is that we, as you sort of suggested earlier, that we look at our existing structures that we have now, deaneries, the seminaries, the pastoral schools that exist, and ask how they can be utilized to address these multiple levels at the same time. Like I would say, for instance, even though we need more than just the standard seminary model, I would say the seminaries need to be involved
Absolutely.
in
They have to.
implementing some of these other things, because frankly they have a lot of the resources that we already need. And I know that some of them do. Like for instance, I know that St. Tikhon's actually has a diaconal program, a distance diaconal program, right? So there's some of this is already going on. And I know that St. Vlad's and Holy Cross do have some distance learning of various kinds that they do.
Right.
So I think yeah, like you said, it's not about competing. It's really about actually kind of expanding outwards a lot of the resources that we currently have. Like we have people who can train people to do these things. The question is just how do we get them connected, and how do we work on the vision of what it means to be a priest, an Orthodox priest in America, so that it's not so that it's easier to get into, but so that it actually addresses the actual needs of the people that are being served in the parishes, the actual needs of the parishes. And I think that this broader approach with a multiple levels and layers, that we have the tools we need.
Yeah.
The first step
and we
is,
have
of course,
in our broader Orthodox tradition, we have the precedents too.
Oh, absolutely. Right. So you don't have to make up anything up. And in fact, we can learn, the jurisdictions can learn from each other. American Orthodox Christians can learn from Orthodox Christians in other countries. And where applicable, where it might be applicable, we can look and see what non-Orthodox groups are doing and look at their solutions and say, okay, maybe we'll do that, or no, that's terrible, or no, that would never apply for us anyway. You know, to learn and not just be so hidebound that, as you said, like, you know, if we didn't do it this way, would we do it this way? You know, because it's not only coming, like this is not just something that's in the future. It is happening now. And it has been happening for decades.
Right.
And it's now reaching a point, I think, where the pain is going to really start to hit.
Yeah. Yep.
So, all right. Well, if people want to read the study, you can go to orthodoxstudies.org and click on the resources tab, and you can read it there. And of course, I'll actually link directly to it in the information for this video, so people can just click. I know if you make people click too many times, you lose them somewhere along the way. It's just studies show,
yes.
You know, so you could just click directly and, you know, check out, there's other material that's there. It's still very new, the Orthodox Studies Institute, but it's good stuff. It's worth reading. And, you know, talk about this with your priest, talk about this with your parish council, talk about how you can support what the real needs are, you know, talk about how you can offer your help. If you've got something to offer, even if it's just a donation, you know, that helps. You know, what is your expertise?
Or helping the priest bear the load, of parish ministry, I think is a hugely important thing for the laity. We aren't, I think a passive laity is a really dangerous temptation, but that breeds clericalism and it's not really healthy. I think working with the priest, he's the leader, but we as laity, and I'm a layman, we have our role to play in assisting, in serving, and helping under the leadership of the clergy.
Yeah, we need way more of you than we need of me. That's the reality of the church. So,
and something like 98% of Orthodox men are not called to be clergy.
That's right.
The men, right? And 100% of women, 98% of men, right? So we all have our roles to play.
Right. So yeah. So what we need to pray for and work for is that those who are called, that we reach them and that we make the way open for them, not so that it's just downhill and easy, because that's going to hurt people. It's going to harm people. It's going to harm parishes, but that we don't put up any artificial barriers, you know, so that these men can not only hear the call, but respond to it and do the ministry that God has gifted them to do. So Matthew, thank you very much for joining me today. And of course, we'll be talking again. There's more to discuss always. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, Father.
All right. Bye-bye.